2 in position east side.
Copy, stack for me.
Front covered, no movement inside.
Units 3 and 4, hold on the step, stand by for green.
Roger, standing by.
Time check 614.
Copy that, lights up, moving.
At 6:14 a.m. on a Tuesday in South Minneapolis, a doorbell camera captures a sequence of events that the Department of Homeland Security would later claim never occurred. The lighting is the color of wet slate, typical for a Minnesota dawn in early October. The street is silent save for the distant hum of a delivery truck 3 blocks away. In the center of the frame is a white front door. It belongs to a man named Elias. 2 black SUVs pull to a stop. They do not park, they hover. 6 men emerge. They are wearing heavy tactical gear, Kevlar vests, helmets, and gloves. They carry the tools of a forced entry, a battering ram, a Halligan bar, and a ballistic shield. One agent, standing slightly to the left of the door, is holding his handgun at a low-ready position. The door opens from the inside. Elias stands there. He is unarmed. In his left hand, he holds a smartphone, held horizontally recording the men on his porch. He is not shouting. He is not moving. He is asking a question that is muffled by the glass, but his posture is one of frozen inquiry. At 6:14 and 42 seconds, a single muzzle flash illuminates the porch. Elias is thrown backward by the force of a .40 caliber round hitting his center mass. He disappears from the frame into the darkness of his own hallway. The agents do not rush in to provide aid. They do not call for a medic. They stand on the porch for 12 seconds, looking at each other. Then, one agent enters. He is not looking for a weapon. He is looking at the floor. He reaches down and picks up the glowing smartphone that had been recording the encounter. He looks at the screen, presses a button, and slides the device into his tactical vest. 3 hours later, a government spokesperson would stand before a podium and tell the press that a violent fugitive had been neutralized after brandishing a firearm during a high-stakes counterterrorism operation. They would say the agents acted with exemplary restraint. They would say that, unfortunately, the agents' body cameras had malfunctioned due to a synchronization error with the local server. The government's narrative was built on the assumption that there were no other witnesses. They did not account for the neighbor across the street, who had installed a high-definition doorbell camera just 48 hours earlier. This is not just a story about a shooting. It is a story about the deliberate, systematic deletion of evidence by the most powerful law enforcement agency in the country, and the realization that in the modern era, the truth is only as valuable as the government's willingness to admit it exists. To understand the weight of what was lost, one must look at the life that existed before 6:14 a.m. South Minneapolis is a landscape of modest 2-story homes and small businesses. It is a place where the sound of the light rail and the smell of industrial bakeries define the morning. Elias had lived on this block since 2011. He was an asylum seeker who had fled a targeted extortion campaign in his home country. He didn't come to America to hide. He came to be seen by the law as a victim in need of protection. Elias's life was a study in punctuality. He was a floor manager at a packaging plant that processed medical supplies. His supervisor, a man named Martin who had worked with him for 5 years, described Elias as the moral center of the warehouse. He was the man who knew the birthdays of every employee on his shift. He was the man who stayed late to help the janitorial staff finish their rounds. His marriage to Maria was a partnership of shared labor. Maria worked as a dental assistant. Their lives were mapped out in 15-minute increments: daycare drop-offs, grocery runs, soccer practices, and the nightly ritual of checking the girls' homework. Their daughters, Maya and Sophia, were 7 and 4. They were the kind of children who were known by everyone on the block for their bright yellow raincoats and their habit of waving at the mail carrier. Elias was not off the grid. He was deeply embedded in the system. He had a social security number for work. He paid his state and federal taxes. He checked in with his IC deportation officer every 6 months at the federal building downtown. During those meetings, he would bring photos of his daughters and his latest pay stubs. He believed that the more he showed them, he was a good resident, the safer his family would be. His attorney, a woman named Sarah who specialized in asylum law, had told him that his case was strong. He was in the slow lane of the immigration system, a place of purgatory but not of immediate danger. However, in the weeks leading up to the raid, a subtle change had settled over the neighborhood. Residents began to notice unmarked vans parked near the elementary school. Men in plain clothes were seen taking photographs of apartment buildings. Elias told Maria not to worry. He told her that as long as they were honest, as long as they were documented, the vans had nothing to do with them. The normal world was built on the belief that the law was a shield. It never occurred to Elias that for some agencies his transparency was not a sign of virtue, but a map for his own capture. The silence of the Elias household was broken at 6:10 a.m. Maria was in the kitchen, her back to the door, waiting for the coffee to brew. She heard the sound of tires on gravel. Not the light crunch of a neighbor's sedan, but the heavy, rhythmic thud of multiple large vehicles. When she looked out the window, she saw the black SUVs. They had no markings. They had no lights. Elias was already awake. He had heard the footsteps on the porch. He didn't think police. In the neighborhood Elias fled years ago, heavy footsteps at dawn meant death. His first instinct was to document. He grabbed his phone from the charging station. "Stay in the back," he told Maria. His voice was calm, a trait that had served him well in the warehouse. "I have my phone. I'll show them the papers. It's okay." The knock on the door was not a request for entry. It was a sequence of strikes so violent that the plaster around the doorframe began to crack. Elias walked toward the door. He didn't look through the peephole. He knew who was there. He believed that, by opening the door voluntarily, he could prevent them from waking the children. He held his phone up, the screen recording, the lens pointed at the men on his porch. He opened the door 6 inches. The disturbance was immediate. The agents did not announce themselves as ICE. They did not ask for Elias. They used a tactic known as dynamic entry, slamming a ballistic shield into the door to force it wide. Elias stumbled back. He kept the phone up. He asked for a warrant. In that moment, the rule of law was still a reality in his mind. He expected a piece of paper. He expected a conversation. The first disturbance ended with the sound of the shot. It was a flat, metallic crack that didn't sound like the movies. It sounded like a heavy cabinet falling over. The house, which moments ago had smelled of coffee and laundry detergent, was suddenly filled with the smell of gunpowder and the sound of Maria screaming from the bedroom. The routine was gone. The normal world had been punctured by a single lead projectile traveling at 2,200 feet per second. The aftermath of the shooting was not a flurry of medical activity, but a flurry of administrative containment. While Elias lay on his hardwood floor, the agents did not apply a chest seal. They did not perform CPR. They began a process called site sanitization. They moved through the house with flashlights looking for cameras. They found the phone. They found the router for the home's internet. The local Minneapolis police officers who arrived 10 minutes later were blocked from entering the home by the federal agents. A perimeter of authority was established. The local police, who were supposed to investigate any shooting in their city, were told that this was a matters of national security and that the federal interest superseded local jurisdiction. By 10 a.m., the official narrative began to take shape. The ICE field office issued a statement claiming that Elias was a known associate of a violent street gang. They claimed that during the service of a high-risk warrant, the subject displayed a weapon and confronted agents in a threatening manner. The media, hungry for details, repeated these claims. The shadow was the label. Once a man is called a gang associate by a federal agency, the public's desire for an investigation drops. But within the community, the gaps in the story were too wide to ignore. Elias's boss went to the press. The soccer parents went to the press. He didn't even own a kitchen knife he liked to use, one neighbor said. Then the neighbor across the street, a man named Nate, checked his doorbell camera. He had seen the black SUVs that morning and thought his house might have been burglarized. When he scrolled back to 6:14 a.m., he saw the truth. He saw the phone. He saw the shot. He saw the agent take the evidence. Nate didn't call the police. He knew the police had already been turned away. He called a local civil rights lawyer. Shadows were no longer just about Elias. Reports began to flood in from across Minneapolis. A legal resident from El Salvador was picked up while taking out his trash. A grandmother was detained at a bus stop. The targeted operation was revealed to be a citywide sweep. People were disappearing into a system that had no public face. The fear was not just that you could be deported. It was that you could be killed in your own home, and the government could simply lie about it until everyone stopped asking questions. The leak of Nate's doorbell footage was the point of no return. It was uploaded to a local activist's social media page at 7 p.m. on a Thursday. By 8 p.m., it was the top story on every news outlet in Minnesota. By Friday morning, it was international. The footage was undeniable. It showed a cold, calculated execution, followed by the theft of evidence. The protests began on Lake Street. They were not just the usual activists, they were the people who lived there. They were business owners, teachers, and nurses. They stood in the rain, holding photos of Elias. The government's response was a hardening of their position. The Department of Justice released a statement saying the video was incomplete and misleading. They claimed that from the agent's perspective, the phone Elias was holding looked like a subcompact firearm. They stated that the theft of the phone was actually the securing of potential digital evidence and that it was being processed in a secure lab. But when the lawyer for Maria asked for the phone back, she was told that it had been lost in transit between the field office and the lab. The point of no return was the realization that the government was not going to blink. They were doubling down on a lie that had been debunked on camera. The city became a battlefield of jurisdiction. The Minneapolis City Council voted to defund any local cooperation with ICE. The federal government responded by threatening to withhold millions in public safety grants. In the middle of this, Maria and her daughters were told they had to leave their home. The house was now part of an ongoing investigation and was being held as evidence. A family that had done everything right was now homeless, their father dead, and their reputation smeared by a government that refused to look at its own crimes. There was no version of events where the Elias family could ever go back to being normal. They were now symbols in a war they never wanted to fight. As the protests grew, a whistleblower from within the regional ICE office began leaking internal documents to a major national newspaper. These documents revealed the Operation Midnight Sun protocols. The operation was not about public safety. It was a pilot program for indiscriminate enforcement. The goal was to maximize the number of removals in democratic-leaning cities to demonstrate the cost of sanctuary policies. The memos revealed that Elias had been flagged not because of a crime, but because he was a high-certainty capture. His check-ins with his immigration officer made him an easy target. The agency had a quota: 500 removals in 30 days. Elias was just number 42 on a spreadsheet. The whistleblower also provided the disciplinary records of the agent who fired the shot. He had been involved in 3 previous use-of-force incidents in other states. In each case, his body camera had mysteriously failed to record the event. Each time he had been cleared by internal investigators. The weapon mentioned in the press release was revealed to be a fabrication discussed in an encrypted group chat between the agents 20 minutes after the shooting. "Just say he had a black object," one agent wrote. "The dark morning will cover the rest." The surveillance van Nate had seen weeks earlier was part of a neighborhood mapping initiative. The agency wasn't just looking for Elias. They were building a database of every house on the block that had an immigrant family. They were planning to turn the entire neighborhood into a detention zone. The most disturbing revelation was the existence of a Tier 2 detention list. People who were to be held indefinitely without access to a phone or a lawyer because they had witnessed sensitive operational events. This explained why the neighbors who saw the shooting were being arrested. The government wasn't just deporting people, they were silencing witnesses. They were using the immigration system as a secret prison for anyone who knew too much about what happened at 6:14 a.m. The collapse was not a single event, but a slow erosion of lives. Maria's dental practice was forced to let her go after federal agents began sitting in the waiting room, asking to see the identification of every patient. The practice lost half its business in a week. Maria was left with no income and a legal bill that was growing by the day. Her 7-year-old daughter, Maya, began to suffer from night terrors. She would wake up screaming that the men in the black masks were coming. Through the windows, she refused to wear her yellow raincoat because she believed it made her too easy to see. Across Minneapolis, the immigrant community began to self-deport. Families who had lived in the city for decades packed their cars in the middle of the night and fled to rural areas or back across the border. The economic fallout was immediate. Entire blocks of Lake Street became ghost towns. In the detention centers, the conditions were collapsing. The overcrowding had reached a point where people were sleeping on concrete floors in shifts. Because the government refused to investigate the Minneapolis killing, the agents in the centers felt emboldened. There were reports of guards using Elias's name as a threat. "Do you want to end up like the guy on the doorbell?" they would ask. The psychological weight of the disappeared became a constant hum in the city. Mothers would stand outside the federal building with lists of names, asking if their sons were inside. They were met with silence. The weight of the truth was becoming unbearable because there was no one left to tell it to. Every institution that was supposed to provide oversight, the courts, the inspectors general, the Congress, was being blocked by a wall of executive privilege and classified operational data. The collapse was the realization that the state had become an island, and the citizens were just the water hitting the shore. The reckoning came in the form of a congressional hearing that was broadcast to a nation that had mostly moved on to the next news cycle. The director of ICE sat at the witness table. He was a man of cold, bureaucratic efficiency. He didn't look at the photos of Elias that Maria held up in the back of the room. When the chairman played the doorbell footage, the director didn't flinch. Our agents are required to make split-second decisions in high-stress environments, he said. The video you are seeing is an amateur recording that does not reflect the tactical reality on the ground. When asked about the missing phone, he stated that the agency was conducting a thorough internal audit of its evidence handling procedures, but that no evidence of misconduct had been substantiated. The reckoning was the total absence of accountability. The agent who shot Elias was not fired. He was not charged. He was transferred to a training facility in another state where he was promoted to a senior instructor. He was now teaching the next generation of agents how to conduct Operation Midnight Sun. The justice system refused to move. A federal judge ruled that the family could not sue the agency because of qualified immunity, a legal doctrine that protects government employees from being held personally liable for actions taken in the line of duty, even if those actions are unconstitutional. The reality was fixed. Elias was dead because he was an easy number. His family was destroyed because they were witnesses. The government was right because it had the power to say it was right. The hearing ended with a call for further study. No one was held responsible. No one apologized. The Operation Midnight Sun was declared a success and was expanded into 3 more cities. 6 months after the shooting, the house in South Minneapolis has been sold to a developer. The blood-stained hardwood in the entryway has been ripped out and replaced with gray laminate. The bullet hole in the wall was patched and painted over with a neutral beige. Maria and her daughters are living in a small apartment in a city where no one knows their name. They do not talk about Elias. They do not watch the news. Maya, the 7-year-old, still keeps a small photo of her father in a locket, but she never opens it. She has learned that in this world, some memories are dangerous. The last weight of the story is the neighbor, Nate. He still lives across the street. Every morning at 6:14 a.m., he wakes up. He checks his doorbell camera, even though there is nothing to see. He says he feels a physical weight in his chest, a sense of guilt for being the one who saw. He still has a copy of the original footage on a thumb drive. He keeps it in a safe deposit box. He calls it the only piece of Elias left on Earth. The story of the Minneapolis disappearance is not a tragedy of errors. It is a tragedy of intent. It is the realization that the government can kill you on camera, hide the evidence, and tell your family that it never happened. And if they have enough power, they can make it true. The last weight is the missing phone. It is out there somewhere, a piece of plastic and glass that contains the truth. But as the years pass, the battery will die, the circuits will corrode, and the video of Elias asking for a warrant will vanish into the same silence that swallowed his life. There are no lessons to be learned from a government that refuses to be taught. There is only the lingering image of a man standing in a doorway, believing that the truth would be enough to keep him alive.